Hey, folks, welcome back to the podcast. This is your host, Ryan Kennedy, and I am very excited about today's episode to really dive into a lot of nutritional strategies to maximize fat loss, to improve gut health. And a lot of people feel lost and confused on what to eat. And maybe you followed a specific diet in the past that's helped you for a while and you plateaued or started experiencing negative issues with that way of eating, or maybe you just kind of feel totally at square one. And nutrition is one of the most debated topics in the health space today. I mean, there's literally thousands of diet books, all sharing different opinions. And, the truth is there's not exactly one specific diet that's perfect for every human. We're all biologically unique. And so there's not a one size fits all approach that works for everyone. And I mean, I know this may not be the news many of you were hoping for. Most of us want a done for you guide with straightforward plan telling you exactly what to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you can follow to feel better, look amazing, perform your best. And what I'm going to do today instead is really break down some of the best practices that apply to the vast majority of the population, and then how you can tweak these foundational elements to suit your body best. So to do this, I've brought on Matt Gallant, who's the CEO and co-founder of BIOptimizers, a health supplement company who I've used for years. And he wrote a book recently called The Ultimate Nutrition Bible, which is an awesome read on how to optimize your nutrition plan based on your goals, your genes, and your psychology. And so we're going to break that down today. So Matt, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I think a great point to start with is that a lot of generalizations you hear on Instagram about food are very dangerous, meaning that they only apply to a small percentage of people, especially more of the fear mongering, hey, kale's dangerous, don't eat oats, don't eat that. And yeah, hopefully with the book and by helping to educate people, we can, free them from the fears, because I think there's way too much fear around food these days, and of course, empower people with the right principles.
Dude, it's a great place to start because I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny because people understand how much fear mongering there is in the news, right? All this negative media, because that's what gets eyeballs. Well, same thing freaking happens in the health and nutrition space. It's just like you said, instead of talking about someone who's been murdered or some sort of terrible tragedy with a car crash or a plane crash, they're talking about how oxalates are going to destroy your life and how, no one should be eating nuts and seeds and how meat is destroying your colon and all sort, million examples. So I'm curious to hear from you, what do you see as some of the most common narratives that are propagated that you're like, dude, this is just downright wrong. This is not even on the mark.
Yeah, well, you hit a bunch of them. Getting back to what I just said, the generalizations are dangerous because they typically don't apply to everyone, very rarely. And even more so when it comes to food sensitivities or genetic mutation issues. We have a whole chapter in the book about food sensitivities and allergies, and it's quite in depth. But the reality is that those conditions typically apply to 1 or 5% of the population. So for the majority of people, they watch an Instagram video, they hear, well, kale's bad or oats are bad. But then when you look at double-blind published research on these ingredients for these foods, there's no issue. A lot of times it's net benefits. And why are they doing that? Because you just nailed it. It grabs attention. And that's the problem with learning nutrition or anything really on social media, is that you're going to get a lot of sound bites that might sound good and grab your attention, but they're not necessarily going to help you. So that's really the challenge in today's world. And, every diet works for a while. A lot of times people are on a suboptimal diet. I mean, the most suboptimal diet out there is probably the standard American diet, which tends to be high carb, high fat, low protein, high calories. And then they switch to anything else and it works really well until they start running into issues, often nutritional deficiencies that are easy to hit on those diets, whether it's keto, whether it's plant-based. Every diet has their pros and cons, which that's why we wanted to cover that in the book. We kind of cover, the 6 major dietary philosophies that are out there and kind of cover just the pros and cons. And I think it's worth noting that no matter what diet you decide to follow, you can counter the cons. And I think that's where a lot of supplements come in. For an example, if you're on a vegan diet, well, you can supplement with vitamin Bs or supplement with amino acids or plant-based proteins, for example, if you're on a carnivore diet, you might need to supplement with potassium and other things that are naturally not present in meat, for example. So it's really about educating people, empowering people, and we're totally against trying to create, here's the one diet for everyone, because that's just not the case,
Yeah, and I think most people, especially listening to this show, know the basics. Avoid ultra processed food. Step one, right? And then step two, maybe don't over consume massive quantities of food, whether it's healthy or not. Like an energy surplus is going to cause weight gain. It's just, you can't defy the laws of physics, right? And then maybe step three is like focus on getting enough protein, right? And so on. So I'm curious, beyond these like very fundamental principles that I think any of these diet camps can probably agree on, what do you think are important kind of step 4, 5, and 6? What type of lab testing should people be considering as like the next best choice? What type of changes should they be experimenting with? Like, how do you think about the order of operations after you have already established like a foundation, a foundational understanding of these fundamentals?
Well, first of all, I love hearing those because a lot of people want to try to deny the laws of thermodynamics. But after that, I would say, first of all, fiber is huge. I think fiber is important. Fermented foods, huge. I think try to eat some fermented food every day. There's a great research done on comparing fermented foods versus fiber, and the fermented foods had a bigger impact on the immune system. So I'm a big fan of trying to eat ferments every day, whether it's sauerkraut or kimchi or natto or whatever you're into. And of course, any sort of probiotic supplement can provide similar benefits. And we get into probiotics, an incredibly deep, complex universe. But those are key. And if we just zoom out and talk about like what is nutrition in its core, well, you mentioned calories. That's one view. Second view is macronutrients. And then the third view is micronutrients. And they all matter. I think a lot of people get locked into one view. So for example, the bodybuilding world, it's calories and macronutrients. Very rarely, unless you're dealing with the smarter, more sophisticated guys like Stan Efferding, do they talk about micronutrients. And those are critical, especially for long-term health or even short-term. If you're deficient in potassium, you're not going to be hyperhydrated. You're not going to be hydrated no matter how much water you drink. You're magnesium deficient, you're probably going to feel stressed out. Your sleep's going to be compromised. Your immune system, your nervous system is most likely going to be kind of stuck in a sympathetic mode. So I'm a big proponent of, once you've got your calories in check, you get your macronutrients in check, take a look at your micronutrients. And of course, there's great tests like SpectraCell and getting blood work done where you can see where you are in the optimal range. And my recommendation for a lot of things is push yourself up to the upper end of the range. Some of these ranges are pretty big, but I certainly noticed when I pushed my magnesium to the top of the range, I felt a lot better than when it was in the lower part of the range. Same thing with potassium and things like that. So I think micronutrients are highly underrated and not really talked enough about. So obviously we sell Magnesium Breakthrough, which is our best-selling product, and that's been a life changer for hundreds of thousands of people that have used it. And right now we're months away from launching our electrolyte blend, which is really going to be a full spectrum mineral product. It's not just going to be the primary electrolytes like potassium, calcium, magnesium, but it's going to contain, optimal amounts or the optimal ratios of virtually every micro mineral that matters. So we're pumped about that. And now we're doing a ton of research in our lab right now, comparing every form of mineral. And that's another topic we can get into for a second. The forms matter. So when you hear something like, magnesium L-threonate, that's a magnesium that's been bonded with threonic acid. And why does that matter? Because those amino acids or acids that those minerals are bonded to will have, first of all, a different level of absorption in the cells, which we've been doing, hundreds of experiments over the last few months, and they tend to impact different parts of the bodies. So that's why with our Magnesium Breakthrough, we combine 7 different minerals with 7 different magnesiums with the cofactors. So you really maximize its impact and maximize the cellular absorption. And that's another point if we want to get more granular with what is nutrition. So you eat food, right? But first you got to break it down. How do you break it down? That's where enzymes come in, hydrochloric acid. That's the first phase of the breakdown. And then later, when it's deeper into your intestinal tract, the probiotics will also kind of act like enzymes, break the food down, they'll feast on it, and then the probiotics will actually produce their own molecules. And that's something people don't talk a lot about, is that probiotics are really like molecule production factories. And bad bacteria will tend to produce bad molecules or unhealthy molecules, whereas good bacteria can produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, GABA. They'll produce vitamins, they'll produce enzymes, and it's really those molecules that have a tremendous impact on our health. And then once you've broken down these nutrients or these foods into nutrients, then it has to cross the intestinal tract, get into your bloodstream, and then get into the cells, right? The last stage of nutrition is really metabolizing. We hear the word metabolism a lot, but what does that really mean? It really means, utilizing the fatty acids, utilizing the glucose, and utilizing the amino acids or the micronutrients that you're consuming. So, really when you want to talk about optimizing your body, you have to look at all of these things. And that's why we're big proponents of enzymes, hydrochloric acid, and then really feeding your body the best food possible, using tests like spectra cells and blood work to see where your deficiencies are. And then the next level is really looking at nutrigenomics. So there's a lot of nutrigenomic tests out there. There's SpectraCell, there's Mudo. I've done 3 of them, and they tend to present different aspects of your genes and tell you, okay, well, you might be elite here, you might have bad mutations there, meaning that in my case, for example, I have bad genes for selenium and zinc, which means I need to consume more of it. I have bad genes for saturated fat. So one of the big changes I've made to my diet in the last year or so has been cutting down on saturated fats and really bumping up monosaturated fats, specifically from olive oil. So my opinion is that over time, making those adjustments early in your life, like right now, could pay big dividends down the line, especially when you're talking about things like saturated fats, which if I continued consuming as much as I did, might have impacted me on a heart level. So nutrigenomics, I think, is a really new, exciting field. We have a whole chapter dedicated to that as well.
That's great and a really good resource. So SpectraCell is what you like for both the nutrigenomics testing and for the actual micronutrient levels testing?
More on the micronutrient side. For the nutrigenomics, I think self-decode is pretty good. There's the DNA company. It's okay. And then there's another one called Mudo, MUHDO. And that one, again, they've all 3 of them kind of give me different insights. So I haven't seen, one test that's the most comprehensive that I can say, okay, this one's clearly the best yet. So
interesting. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people are get almost confused themselves when they take too deep of a dive into trying to decode some of the genetic predispositions like what you're describing, and then trying to course correct certain aspects. And then it just becomes a little counterintuitive to where they're hyper-focused on things that may not be as big a needle movers as things that they may be neglecting, as far as the bigger picture. The micronutrient analysis makes a lot of sense when it does come to sensitivities or food intolerances. You have immune system related stuff, you have actual, some of these plant defense systems we talked about. You have a lot of reasons people can eat something like that you would eat and not respond well to it, or vice versa. What do you find is the most practical way to understanding that? Is it just kind of the gold standard food journaling, listening to your body, or do you have any labs and data points that you like to look for?
Well, I think the gold standard is subjective feedback, specifically when it comes to that. So yeah, food journaling is a great tool, great resource. It's free. So, if you eat something and you got bloating, you got gas, you don't feel good, your energy drops, well, there was something wrong with that meal, whether it was too much sugar, and we can get into leaky gut because I think it's an important part of this conversation. But Cyrex is a pretty good test. So it's called Cyrex, kind of, probably the best food allergy test you can do, food sensitivities. So I think it's like a $900 panel. But I think when you eat food that stress you out, and one of the things that's I think underrated, and I haven't seen a great system for this yet, but if your HRV crashes after a meal, that food is stressful to your body. So that's
Mm.
kind of a simple, if you want to use kind of a more complicated metric than just how you feel, HRV is a good one. But let's talk about leaky gut, because I think that a lot of people have it. How do you measure leaky gut? Right now, the consensus is called zonulin. So when your zonulin is way out of the range, you probably have leaky gut. I know the best doctors that I know, that's what they're using as far as panels.
And that's
It's
a
a pretty
blood
cheap
marker
test.
you would add to a blood
Yeah,
test?
it's a blood marker. I think it's about $100,
Okay.
relatively inexpensive. So let's talk about why leaky gut happens. What is leaky gut? Well, leaky gut is basically holes in your intestinal tracts. The simplest way I can explain it. There's, you have these junctions in your intestinal tract, and food particles that should not be getting through are getting through, and then your body will react, whether it's an inflammatory response, whether it's, I mean, extreme cases of it's an allergic response, but typically it's an inflammatory response. And myself, for a while, I thought A1 protein coming from most dairy products was the enemy for a long time, because I would eat it and I would feel that inflammatory response in my knees and my feet. So I became a zealot, or, one of these fear mongers around A1 protein. And then I sealed my gut, and we're going to talk about how to do that. I sealed my gut, and now I can eat A1 protein and have no reactions at all. So that was a really big lesson for me, in that there's certain foods that will be problematic if you have leaky gut. So again, as far as do I have leaky gut or not? Well, if you eat dairy or certain products and you get those inflammatory responses, I would say likely. And then you can, get a zonulin test and see what happens. And recently we had Dr. Gus Vickery, who's a great practitioner, test one of our products called Microbiome Breakthrough. And we can talk a little bit about how it works. But there was a 90+% reduction in zonulin with all 11 patients that he tried it with. And why is that? Because that product is very unique in the sense that it's the #1 healthy biofilm builder we've ever tested in the lab. And microbiome, or your gut bacteria, will create biofilm in two situations. One, when they're under attack, they do that as a self-defense mechanism, or two, when they have kind of the perfect environment. And the problem with most probiotics, like almost all of them, is that they're transient. So that means they go through your intestinal tract, they'll eat food, they'll double, they'll have some benefits. I'm not saying they don't have benefits, but in terms of actually colonizing on your intestinal tract or intestinal wall, they will not do that. They'll basically pass through you. And of course, if you keep consuming it, they'll continue providing benefits. But what's unique about Microbiome Breakthrough is that all the supporting ingredients that are there with the microbiome or with the gut bacteria will produce an incredible healthy biofilm. And, I was doing a lot of fasting last year. I fasted about 40 days, not in a row, but I did like 8 5-day fasts. And what would happen after a fast, and of course, if you fasted several days, this, your intestinal tract will dry up. Like gut bacteria will typically have about a 48-hour lifespan. So if you don't eat for 3, 4, or 5 days, your gut bacteria is kind of going dormant. And if you start eating normal food, well, you could have diarrhea or turbulence and go to the bathroom, right?
Yep.
Well, when I started using Microbiome Breakthrough as the first thing to break a fast, I had zero problems, because again, that product will go and rebuild the intestinal tract and really build a really healthy gut wall. And it's I think probably our most underrated product, because most people don't understand how it works.
Well, this is fascinating stuff, man. I'm going to start testing the zonulin marker on a lot more people and seeing what impact. So with the formula, I'm looking at this Microbiome Breakthrough, and it seems like it's a combination of this IgY max, which I haven't seen before. Most products of this nature have IgG, like immunoglobulins, typically from like a colostrum or a dairy source. And it looks like this is from an egg source. Can you talk a little bit more about this IgY max and why you guys chose this over like the typical IgG?
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful I mean, again, so we have a lab, just I want to rewind and kind of answer your question a different way. So we have a lab, we have 20 people in the lab, including multiple PhDs, mostly master's students, and we run nonstop experiments. The head of the lab has a PhD in probiotics, in healthy gut film. And we run every probiotic we can find, not just ours, but other ones, through this gamut of tests, from survivability tests, acid survival, bile survival, antibiotic survival, the list goes on. And then we also test biofilm formation. So the way we build products is that we do all these experiments testing combinations. Sometimes it takes us 18 months, 24 months. And like there's one formula that's been over 2 years now where we just run, hundreds, sometimes thousands of experiments to test, what combination is the best. And the IGY Max is incredible. And we just found a better one that's going to replace the IGY Max pretty soon, probably in a few months. So we're really excited about that. So we're constantly improving our formulas. But yeah, the IGY Max is a very potent product. And then all the other supporting ingredients are a big part of the healthy biofilm formation.
This is great. And with this product being a powder, does it need to be like, do you need to avoid heat? Is it okay to add it to coffee? Is it okay to add it with food, like in a blender to a smoothie, or do you just mix it with just plain water?
Plain water. What I recommend is, this is a trick I learned from Dr. Kassar, if you know who he is. When you want stuff to go through into your intestinal tract, like pound at least like 2 cups of it. Because, the gravitational force, the pressure, the weight will drive a lot of it down into your intestinal tract. So what I do 2 scoops, 2 cups of water. By the way, it tastes amazing, especially the vanilla. The chocolate is actually a little bit more effective based on our lab tests, but the vanilla is vegetarian, not vegan. Chocolate is not vegan, not vegetarian. But yeah, 2 scoops, 2 cups of water, and try to down the whole thing in one shot. So you're really trying to drive this mixture into your intestinal tract, and that's it. And first thing in the morning, empty stomach, is what I recommend.
Great. That's very cool insights, man. I'm going to certainly start experimenting with this myself.
Yeah.
Moving on from the leaky gut, or I guess maybe to wrap up one piece on that. What have you seen be the most important nutritional factors as far as things to avoid that cause it, exacerbate it, outside of the supplementation? What should people be thinking about?
Well, again, the general consensus is, junk food, fried food, all of those things tend to make it worse or potentially create it. Whereas obviously eating, bone broth, colostrum, all of those things can help, seal your gut. Obviously using something like Microbiome Breakthrough is another level. But yeah, I don't think it's clearly, 100% understood why it's happening. But the general consensus is, processed food is probably the main cause, or drugs or other unhealthy things that are probably destroying the gut biome, destroying the bacteria. Again, bacteria are very sensitive. Like the way to think about bacteria is like every meal you eat, everything that's going through you is impacting them. And, some of them will feed, some types of food will feed bad bacteria. Other types of food will feed good bacteria. So, and my opinion is like when you change diets, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I remember I was hardcore keto, and then Wade, other co-founder, business partner, was eating salads every day. And he's like, well, you should try eating like we call it the big ass salad. And Wade will eat like 3-pound salads, literally. I've seen him weigh it at Whole Foods. And he's like, try this. So I tried it. And then the weird thing was after like 3-4 days, I started craving salads. And that was like a really weird thing. Like, how do I go from craving steaks to craving salads in like 4 or 5 days? And then it dawned on me, a few years later, I'm like, well, what's probably occurring is that I think a lot of our craving signals are coming from the bacteria in your gut that's being fed by certain foods. And I think that's one of the reasons why people that are, eating a lot of junk food, processed food, fast food, and are essentially addicted to it can struggle until their taste buds and their gut biome, and of course their psychology makes that shift. But I'm sure you've seen that with your clients. There's a certain point where they enjoy healthy food. They want it. They crave it. I mean, I'm there. I'm sure you're there as well. And what occurred? Well, of course, yeah, there's some psychological changes, but I think a lot of the cravings are being driven by your gut biome.
Makes sense. No, I've certainly seen the same thing. Coming back to something you mentioned around fasting, 40 days last year, dude, that's no joke. So talk to me about what you kind of learned through all your fasting endeavors, what you think is like a good general practice for people, as far as, something they could do sustainably. Like, how do you think about fasting, I guess, is how I should phrase the question.
Yeah. So first of all, I think if you've never fasted, starting with intermittent fasting is a good idea. Like when you go to an average person, when you go to someone that's never fasted before and you say, "Hey, don't eat today," and I've literally heard this many times, they'll typically reply with, "I'm going to die."
Yes.
And that fear of, if I don't eat, I'm going to die is, it's a real psychological thing. And I think one of the unsung benefits of fasting is overcoming that. I'm actually on day 3 of a fast right now. Okay. So, overcoming that fear is really empowering, I think. Whereas people that they need, they feel like they need to eat every 4 hours or 3 hours or 5 hours, whatever it is. They're almost enslaved to that. And when you fast for several days, you'll notice how much time you were spending just thinking about food, preparing food, eating food, cleaning the plates. Like it is a lot of time. So that's kind of insightful. But I think the benefits are obviously autophagy, especially once you get into 72 plus hours. Using it for weight loss is a strategy. Now, I'm not a fan, and let's talk about intermittent fasting for a second. I think intermittent fasting is a good starting point, but there's a big downside to intermittent fasting. And you've heard a lot of people like Peter Attia and Tim Ferriss say, well, I did it, and then I lost a lot of muscle mass and my body fat percentage went up, but essentially the same amount of calories. So what's occurring there? Well, there's something called mTOR, which is a very anabolic, it's a very anabolic thing that happens in the body. When you eat enough protein, especially like you need about 3 grams of leucine per meal, you activate mTOR. So if you go from, let's say, eating 3 or 4 meals a day to 1, the window or time per day that your mTOR is activated gets shrunk significantly. So the amount of time that your body is anabolic is greatly reduced. And I think that's the main reason why a lot of people will lose muscle mass on an intermittent fasting diet. Now, can you maintain muscle mass doing intermittent fasting? Probably. If you do enough weight training, consume enough protein, if you have good genetics, you sleep well. But I do think it's harder. And again, like what I did last year, which was powerful, I would do 5-day fasts. I would do hyperbaric chambers, especially day 3, day 4, day 5, which was some great research that came out that showed about a 300% mobilization in stem cell. So the stem cells being moved around the body 300% more doing hyperbaric chambers. There's a great product called Stem Regen, which is a stem cell activator. So I use Stem Regen. So one of the main reasons I'm doing it is I want to maximize my stem cells. I do that by fasting. I do that by taking Stem Regen, and then I'll go use the hyperbarics. And doing that, in combination, in my opinion, really, again, maximizes stem cell production and also maximizes the mobilization so they can go everywhere in my body and have a positive impact. So that was one of the reasons I did it. And of course, I think one of the simplest ways to use it for fat loss is, if, like, let's say you're eating 2,000 calories a day, 7 days a week. You cut out one day, well, you just went from 14,000 calories a week to 12,000 calories a week. So using it that way I think is another good tool. And as you get deeper and deeper into a cut, you can go from 1 day to 2 days a week. So I think there's a lot of ways to use fasting. And of course, we have an entire chapter kind of devoted to all the different ways. And if, here's the hack, and this is a hot take, but I'm a fan of GLP-1 agonists. I've used them all. I've used semaglutide, I've used tirzepatide, and I've used retatrutide, which is a newer one. And each one is more powerful than the next. And again, as somebody who's always interested in experimenting with things, I feel a kind of responsibility to try almost any molecule that won't harm me and could have some benefits. So the combination of using a GLP-1 agonist in conjunction with fasting, I mean, it's a game changer. It makes fasting exponentially easier. And yeah, so like what I was doing a lot last year was like a 5-day fast. And then I was eating for about, 11 to 14 days. So what I was doing is, trying to gain as much muscle mass possible, maintain muscle mass when I would eat. Then when I would do a 5-day fast, I would typically work out the first 3 days because you still have amino acids floating around in your body. After day 4 or 5, I don't recommend lifting weights. Cardio is great. It'll increase autophagy even further, but you could potentially go catabolic, like lifting weights day 4, day 5. I mean, I've done squats on day 5 before just to see if I could. So that was kind of the system I was using, and it was quite effective for losing body fat and getting results.
Yeah, that's fascinating, man. So do you use the GLP-1 agonists chronically or just during these fasting windows?
I was using it primarily during the fasting windows. I've gone on and off a few times. Again, I just kind of got back on about 3 weeks ago, trying retatrutide, which is a harder one to get. I had to get it straight from China. But yeah, it's powerful. And if you look at the research on it, people on average lost 25% of their body weight versus, I think, 15% versus in tirzepatide, and I think it's around 10% with semaglutide. So yeah, it's pretty potent. And my comment is, if anybody's going to be on GLP-1 agonists, here's what's going to happen when you go off. You're going to go back to your habits. You're going to go back to the way you were. Now, I'm very good at maintaining my body weight. I don't have a problem. Like, I eat well. So for me, it wasn't an issue. But what we're seeing a lot with people that go off of GLP-1 agonists is they regain the weight. Why? Because they didn't really learn anything, right? They didn't, let's see, improve their nutritional habits, whether it's eating more protein, eating more fiber, managing calories. If you don't do that and you just use GLP-1 agonists, I would say the odds that you regain the weight you lost is pretty high.
I completely agree. I think the loss of muscle is another big thing for most people that aren't super mindful about resistance training. And then, I see them similar to you. I think they're a net positive on society, especially when you look at the people really struggling with morbid obesity and really, I don't care what potential long-term side effects these things have. I can pretty much guarantee they're not as bad as the side effects of being 300 plus pounds and the types of disease risk that proposes on an individual. I'm not as big of a proponent as you just for using them for, people who are healthy weight as a tool to accelerate, hunger management and things. I have played around with some of these GLP-1 promoting probiotic strains. And you being an expert in this probiotic world, I'm curious if you've seen benefits, if you guys have researched these, Akkermansia strains and bifidobacterium strains that help to upregulate someone's own GLP-1 production.
No, I think it's a really promising area though. So I think the code will probably get cracked. We are looking at other natural plants that can produce GLP-1. So we're kind of starting to look at that. So we will probably produce a natural hunger management product and probably release that next year. But yeah, I think it's a really viable, back to what I was saying earlier, like gut bacteria produce molecules. So if you can have bacteria that naturally produce GLP-1 agonists, it's a good thing. So, but yeah, like I said earlier, I'm a radical self-experimenter. There's not too many molecules I haven't used. And, I feel a sense of responsibility for, just trying stuff and pushing the envelope sometimes.
Love it, man. Well, yeah, I've seen initially some good results with people I work with using like a Pendulum's GLP-1 probiotic. And I don't think the effects are nearly as pronounced as the peptides themselves, the drugs, but it's kind of it seems to serve as a nice middle ground for people who just have maybe 10 to 20 pounds they're trying to lose and struggling with some sugar cravings. And, they're on the lesser end of issues when it comes to their body weights and their metabolic health. So yeah, for what it's worth, not a huge sample size, but initial feedback has been really positive.
Yeah, there's a key point I want to hit. And I realized I had a lot of weight loss clients as a trainer. I was a trainer for a decade, worked with a lot of people, including pro athletes. And, my favorite client other than pro athletes was obese people. So I had my best friend lose 191 pounds in 18 months. I had another client lose about 150 pounds. And the reason those were my favorite clients was because seeing that entire life transformation from not just their body and their weight, but their psychology and their emotions. And, my best friend went from literally being a virgin to married in a couple of years, which was awesome. Again, it was a complete life transformation. Because, I think when people are obese or morbidly obese, life becomes really difficult in so many ways. So
Agreed.
I was a chubby kid. So like, I know the pain of that. And of course, having been made fun of as a kid, again, I experienced the pain of, being chubby, which was, something that I struggled with growing up. But what I realized, and this was like a huge epiphany, and it's kind of, we talk about that early in the book. And then we talk about just the lack of success in weight loss, right? 3%. That is the long-term success rate in weight loss. It's pretty bad. Why is that? Because our genetics, our evolution is that we want to survive at all costs. Like the primary driver of our biology is survival. And if we go back, tens of thousands of years, how would you survive? Well, when you would see or get food available, whether it's killing an animal, finding a fruit tree, finding some vegetation, you would gorge on it. And you would gorge and, try to store a bit of body fat, and then who knows when the next meal would be. So we still have that ancient wiring. And part of that ancient wiring is all these starvation self-defense mechanisms that kick in. Testosterone drops. I just talked to a friend of mine earlier today. He said, yeah, I just did a bunch of fasting and my testosterone just crashed, So something to be mindful of, but testosterone will drop, leptin will drop, hunger hormones, ghrelin, and also, neuropeptide Y and PY will increase in the brain. And there's something that some people in the fitness industry call the hunger, which I experienced once. I got married about 13 years ago, and I dieted really hard. Like I was kind of on a good path. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to lose another 10 pounds, started really cutting calories and cranking exercise. And after the wedding, I was hungry for 2 years, and I regained most of the weight back. So that was my first real experience with that starvation survival mechanism. And a lot of women, especially that diet really hard for fitness competitions, will completely blow up after a show. Like they'll actually be worse than they were before they started. And again, it's these survival self-defense mechanisms kicking in. And of course, reverse dieting, I think, is one of the key strategies that people need to employ, especially when getting off a very long, extended weight loss journey. Doing diet breaks throughout the journey, I think, is really important as well for psychological and for physiological reasons. So again, we cover that in the book. But yeah, again, I'm a big believer that fundamentally obesity is driven by our ancient genetic wiring. And not to say like, not the same narrative as I've got bad genes. Like most people technically have bad genes. There's only a very small percentage of people that have, let's say, elite weight loss genes. They're the lean people, the people that kind of get away with everything. They're naturally typically more fidgety. So their NEAT is a lot higher than the average person. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's probably some other variables, but I think the power of GLP-1 agonists is that it's helping us overcome the primary driver of obesity, which is we want to get just to the basic mechanisms, people are overeating and not burning enough, right? The average American eats about 3,500 calories a day and burns about 2,700. So that's a 800 calorie surplus per day on average. That's the reason for obesity. And again, the next question is, well, why are they overeating? Well, we have the perfect storm of engineered food that's engineered to be as addictive as possible, as hyper palatable as possible, meaning it's jam-packed with flavor, right? Take a bite on a Dorito. Take a look at a Dorito.
Yeah.
Look at the food particles that are on that chip. That's the flavoring, which again, just maximizes addiction. Again, these food chemists are wizards. They're wizards, sure that it's as addictive as possible and as they lower the satiety level as much as possible to get you to eat more. And that's where eating unprocessed food is superior because you're not dealing with those things. Then we have Uber Eats and all these food apps that can push a button, get 3,000 calories delivered to my door in 20 minutes. And then we have this ancient wiring and we typically move less. So it's the perfect storm of all of those things, which again is, in my opinion, primarily driven by that ancient wiring, which is survival. So the GLP-1 agonist is really the first miracle drug that is kind of addressing that. And I think we'll continue seeing more and more powerful solutions emerge. And, let me put it this way. If I could go get a genetic therapy that would permanently put me in the same state that I am when I'm on GLP-1 agonist, I would do it because, thinking about food is a waste of mental energy. So now when I'm on these GLP-1 agonists, like, well, do I want to eat, not want to eat? It's more like a mental decision instead of being kind of compelled constantly. Well, what am I eating next and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, dude, you summarized that perfectly as far as the reasons that our society is where it's at today. All these variables working against people. And I do agree with you in that. I think it's going to be a net positive to humanity, without a doubt, when you just look at all these factors. And I'm excited for the new developments as far as finding ways to target the same pathway or maybe other mechanisms that have less side effects and less potential for long-term issues, or maybe do, resolve this issue, like you were saying, with a potential gene therapy long-term, where you're not having to, inject something every week in order to maintain the benefits. So I think that's a really fascinating area. Now, one thing I want to really dive into as we wrap up here, Matt, that I know you're quite an expert on, and you did mention you've tried most compounds in the name of self-experimentation, which I really expect, is nootropics. Especially for the demographic I work with, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of investors, a lot of people want to be on their mental A game. And a lot of these different nootropics are, hotly debated on the pros, the cons, the upside, the long-term downside, all these different areas of focus. So I'm curious to get your take on a few that, I've been kind of digging deeper into. One of which is kratom. Do you have any experience with kratom? Do you like it? Do you not like it? As far as the upside versus the downside, what's your feedback?
I have a very addictive personality, and I'm very cautious and wary of things that have addictive properties to them. And I think kratom is one of them. So short answer is no, but we can keep going down the list. I'm sure you'll throw a few at me that I've tried.
Oh, so you've never even tried it?
I have. Again, not a lot, just a little bit. And yeah, didn't really, again, I don't know if you know this, but we also have another company called Utopia where we have a whole slew of nootropic formulas. So again, if we're really going to get into nootropics, we can talk about other more powerful compounds as well, like cerebral lysine, dihexa, things like that.
Yeah, that might be a good, because a lot of the things I'm going to bring up are, debatably addictive. Like, I know nicotine pouches and, it's probably I'm a fan. Quickly catching up to caffeine. Oh, there you go. Got a little nicotine gum. So the Zins, I feel like, is quickly catching up to caffeine as far as like widespread adoption. And so I'm curious to hear your feedback as far as like upper limits you think about, downsides you think about, how you look at this as far as, because nicotine, in my experience, is way more addictive than kratom, probably more addictive than anything I've used.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And yeah, again, I'm in it. I use a lot of nicotine. So again, nicotine from a brain perspective will enhance the acetylcholine system. So your acetylcholine is really your focus system. You need to give your brain choline, which is, naturally available in eggs. One of my favorite, I use usually this like once or twice a day. It's one of our products right now. It's called Mental Reboot AM. You just open the cap and it gives you choline and choline precursors. It's really just kind of a calm clarity. But when your brain's deficient in choline, you will not be able to maintain focus. So again, what I like about nicotine is that it doesn't give you the jitteriness that being over caffeinated will do, but it does enhance focus. In terms of the form factor, yeah, I think gum, the Zins, things like that are of course superior to vaping. Although I will say that probably the greatest, most powerful nicotine buzz I've ever tried is using the Volcano. If you know what a Volcano is,
Oh yeah,
very popular, German machine. And then you vaporize organic Indian tobacco. And then of course, if you know who Paul Chek is,
yep.
I've been to Paul Chek's place. He's the wizard of bags. So he has a whole science and art and methodology he's built around combining organic tobacco with other herbs and essential oils. And I mean, it's powerful. So you can almost build an entire brain optimization, brain modulation system with using nicotine and other herbs as a blend.
Yeah, I can mirror that feedback. I've had a few bags with Paul over the years, and I'll tell you what, Matt, there's a reason I don't own a Volcano vaporizer, because it is awesome. It's a little too awesome.
I don't own one for the same reason, but when I do go visit Wade's got one, and of course I'll indulge in bags.
Yeah.
I think the biggest concern I have personally about nicotine is the vasoconstriction effects. So it is a vasoconstrictor, and that's why it can raise blood pressure, raise resting heart rate, which you'll see if you track your measurements. Of course, using nitric oxide products, working out. I mean, there's ways to kind of help counter that, but I'm just sharing that's my primary concern on the nicotine usage.
And do you think of dosage as far as like what is a reasonable versus not a healthy amount when you think of the gums and the Zins and all this?
It's hard to say. I mean, I can chew through an entire pack of Lucy a day. It's about 4 milligrams. I don't know how much of the 4 you really absorb. So yeah, it's hard to say like how much is really getting into your system. I will say like when I do too much, I'll feel it, I'll feel it. But it's one of those things, your receptors will actually upregulate. So your ability to consume more and more nicotine is a very real thing. And that's kind of part of the addictiveness of it. So yeah, probably not qualified to answer that question properly.
No, you definitely answered it well. And I've had a similar experience. I've played around with the Zins, and I really enjoy nicotine as a nootropic for the reasons you described, and, kind of try and keep a reasonably healthy relationship with it, which isn't always an easy thing to do. But I have taken many breaks, and I have noticed for myself personally, even if I'm using, 4 or 5 nicotine pouches a day for a prolonged period of time, and I stop cold turkey, I don't get any withdrawals the way I will with caffeine. Where with caffeine, like I'll actually get withdrawals. I'll have a headache. I'll feel terrible, like I got hit by a truck. I mean, it's horrible. Nicotine, I get really strong cravings. Like it's a very mentally addictive for me. But physically, I feel totally fine. Like I don't have an issue focusing. I don't have an issue going about my day. I don't feel shitty. I just want some freaking nicotine, right? It's just like a very strong pull for me. I don't know if you share the same feedback or not, but I don't know. I've found it to be pretty easy to stop physically, at least.
Yeah, since I've been on, I haven't really tried stopping, to be honest. I did read some interesting research, I think came out last year around L-theanine being a potential viable solution to help because it competes on a lot of the same receptors. So, I am, and to be completely transparent, I am thinking about, well, should I try stopping just to see, can I do it? And my game plan would probably be consume a ton of L-theanine, which I'm a fan of anyways. I'd probably be completely chill. Usually I use it before bed. We use it in sleep breakthrough, things like that. So it'd be an interesting experiment to do like 300, 400, 500 milligrams of L-theanine a day during the day and see what that does.
Yeah, you also need to get some of this. I use this pure gum, which is just regular gum, and it makes it a much easier transition just to have like the mouthfeel and the ritual to be similar as like a Lucy gum. Um, that's another good tool when you do make that transition. Moving on from there, I do have a question on smart drugs, more like the modafinil, the Adderall, Ritalin, this whole world of pharmaceuticals. Are there any of those that you find, you like or you use, or, is there any that you're strongly against?
Yeah. So when I started getting to nootropics around like 10 years ago, the modafinil was one of the first things I tried. I found it to be, I remember doing like annual planning meetings on modafinil, kind of getting the executives on it. And, it was powerful. I did not like how I felt the following day. So for me, the way I evaluate a lot of these molecules is like, I want stuff that has close or zero downside. Like if there's any downside the following day, that's a huge negative. And modafinil, for me at least, fell into that category. And of course, when I did nutrigenomics, it showed up. It said like, yeah, you probably shouldn't use modafinil. So it could be just a me thing, but it certainly helps improve awakeness. In terms of the hardcore things like Adderall, never done Adderall. I did try microdosing Vyvanse. And when I say microdose, I'm talking like open a cap, wet your finger, touch it, like that amount, like a micro amount. It was insanely potent. I can't imagine taking an entire capsule. Like I've never used even a 1/20th of a capsule in one shot. So that's all I've really tried on that. What I've noticed from a lot of users is, again, body adapts and they need more and more of it. And I've just noticed that people that tend to get on some heavy Adderall cycles will tend to burn out a little bit. So it's never really appealed to me.
Yeah, it's an intense stimulant. I'm on the same boat as you are. What you mentioned you guys make products at Utopia. What are a couple of the key nootropics? You rattled off a few when we first started on this topic that you just think rise to the top as far as the efficacy and the benefits that you get from using them.
Yeah. Well, let me cover a couple of things that we can kind of wrap up with Utopia. So let's talk about neurogenesis. What is neurogenesis? If you increase your neurogenesis, your brain is more malleable, plastic. Its ability to change, transform, learn is improved. So there's a lot of things that will increase neurogenesis. There's a lot of things that will increase different types of brain growth factors. I think probably the king is cerebral lysin. So I've done multiple, pretty extensive cycles of cerebral lysin, like 10 mLs a day for 60 days. I think that cerebral lysin is incredibly powerful. It's 4 different brain growth factors, including BDNF, NGF, glial cell growth factor. So there's a lot going on. It's a painless shot. You have to inject it. And again, I would say like 5 mLs is a good starting dose. And the question is, when should you use that? Because in my mind, neurogenesis is like using steroids. Like imagine somebody just injecting testosterone or steroids, but not training.
Mm.
Well, it's kind of weird, right? Yeah, you'll get some benefits from it. But the way I use it is I'm a huge fan and, student proponent of neurofeedback. So for example, September, I'm going to do my 11th round of like 1 week hardcore neurofeedback, which has probably been the greatest brain optimization thing I've ever done. But we stack a lot of molecules with it. And I'll run 30 days of cerebral lysin before, because it tends to accumulate and build up, and then continue 30 days after. So I'm trying to really maximize my neurogenesis for the brain training, which is, again, 5 days of 5-6 hours a day, sometimes more, of pushing your brain like you've never pushed it before. And we certainly noticed, I mean, I did a bunch of trainings before using these tools, a bunch of trainings after. It's not comparable, both in terms of the performance and the gains. So cerebral lysine is incredible. Dihexa, very powerful as well for the same reasons. Again, BDNF. Lion's mane, easily accessible, will also improve BDNF. So those three are very powerful tools. Of course, if you stack them together, you get incredible effects. And I wouldn't recommend being on those things all the time. I don't think you want to just, crank your BDNF all the time. So you don't want to be very strategic. If you're, let's say, doing some hardcore learning, hardcore transformation work, hardcore neurofeedback, I think that they can act, again, like steroids for the brain. Any questions on that before we kind of switch over to Nootopia for a minute?
No, that's very good. Very good breakdown.
Yeah. So just to wrap up with Nootopia. So again, there's a man named Mark Effinger. He'd be a great guest for your show, by the way. He is the wizard when it comes to nootropics. And with nootropics, it's really complex design. Unlike a lot of supplements where you can have like one molecule or maybe 2, 3, 4, the way he approached it is really looking at all the different ways and all the different systems that need to be enhanced or fed to produce a certain effect. I will tell you kind of our top sellers and the most popular ones. Number one is called Dopa Drops. As the name implies, it's a dopamine enhancer. Like that product, not just the testimonials we get, but just the impact it's had on a lot of people's life has been life-changing. Like a lot of people just don't have enough dopamine. So it's a multi-stage kind of dopamine enhancer, including dopamine precursors and, some other dopamine producing ingredients. And it's awesome. It's a really powerful product. Not a lot of stim. And that's the thing that Mark, the formulator, did, is like, there's not a lot of stim. Like, it's not one of these caffeinated, where caffeine is the primary thing. Sometimes you use like 30 milligrams of caffeine in a formula just to give you a range. Brain Flow, which I use almost every day, is another popular one. Really increases lateral thinking, verbal fluency. Some of my favorites. Mental Reboot AM, which we're probably going to rebrand. It's really like calm clarity. And it's really it gives your brain choline. Another popular one is called Upbeat. It's a serotonin booster. So we have a bunch of other formulas I'm not going to get into, but those are really the most popular. And when people use them, they really become super fans and super users. It's been a game changer for me, and it's been a really fun journey to play with them. And to be able to modulate your brain at will is powerful.
I agree. I think these are fantastic tools when used correctly. And there's just immense interest because majority of adults in our society, at least in the circles I run with, aren't as into physical optimization. Like they don't care how much weight they could bench press or getting to 6% body fat or being like this incredible physical athlete. But they, run businesses, they're entrepreneurs, they want to be on their mental A game. So the mental optimization, I think, is a lot more interesting for, most people, especially people tuning into this podcast. So these are some really good insights, man. With the Dopa Drops, what are the key ingredients that you're using to boost dopamine?
Yeah, there's L-Dopa, which of course is well known. I'd have to pull up the label. I don't have that one memorized.
Okay.
And then Mr. Newts is the mastermind behind that. So again, he had a company that was producing nootropics. I had a friend of mine that says, like, dude, I've tried them all. I've tried, Neurohacking Collective and Qualia and all this stuff. He says, like, his stuff is a different dimension. I bought $5,000 worth of his nootropics for real. I spent months trying all these combinations. And then after a few months, I'm like, okay, we need to acquire his company, which we did. And now, we rebranded. It's called Nootopia. And another incredible nootropic product that I use is Mushroom Breakthrough, which he built as well. It's 4 different mushrooms, We use hyper concentrated forms of lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, and chaga. Flavors are amazing. I don't know if you've tried it, but we have a chocolate, salted caramel, and a chai. That's my go-to. Like that's kind of like my base layer that I drink every day. And you really feel the cordyceps, you feel the lion's mane, not in a jittery way, but in a really kind of empowering, focused, productive way. So yeah, that product is, it just became our 4th bestseller in a record amount of time. People really love it. Tastes amazing.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been super great, Matt. Really appreciate you coming on, sharing all your wisdom. Where can people go to learn more about your work?
Yeah, well, I think we have a special discount code, right, for your viewers. Just going to pull that up right now, which is BIOptimizers.com/Ryan. So you got Ryan as the extension there. So I think if you use Ryan10, you'll save 10% off. Another tip too, if you want to save money, we have typically bundles with more products. If you subscribe, you'll save even more. So you can save 10% plus with more with the bundle, plus more with the subscription. We have a 365-day, no questions asked money back guarantee. Our refund rate is about 0.5%. So that means like people really love the products, keep using it. Our average rating on our products are on 9 out of 10 or 4.5 stars. So yeah, the products rock. And when they don't deliver, we happily give people their money back because, you know, we feel we don't deserve it. But, you know, the grand majority of the time, people love the products. They end up on subscriptions and, you know, we're constantly trying to build better formulas, new stuff. Again, I mentioned earlier, we got the electrolyte breakthrough coming out. We're working on really like a next level omega-3 solution. One will be non-plant based. The other one will be vegan. We're working on Man Stacks, kind of the prototype name, hormonal optimization for men. So we've been, you know, really working hard on that one for a while. So yeah, we had a ton of fun stuff. And our goal is to try to kind of build best-in-class products for every goal or every health challenge that someone has. So one by one, we're, you know, putting things through our extensive process of finding the best ingredients, combining them, doing the research, and we just keep investing more and more in our lab team and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, man. I love what I do, and it's awesome helping people get healthier, as you know.
100%, Matt. And I can speak firsthand and clinically. You know, I've had great results with, you know, your enzyme product to help with digestion. I'm excited to try this microbiome breakthrough. And then I also always travel with the P3OM. So you guys formulated this special probiotic that, man, if you're having an upset stomach or eat something that just doesn't really tolerate, you have some nausea or loose stool, just don't feel well, it gets you right as rain very quickly. So it's an awesome product for that is when the instance I use it most frequently.
Yeah, we tested in the lab and it kills E. coli in the lab. So, you know, if you consume stuff that has you running to the bathroom, you know, go to Mexico, Bali, and you eat the wrong foods or drink the wrong water, P3OM is an incredible solution. It's also a proteolytic, so it kind of acts like an enzyme. And out of all the probiotics we've tested in terms of neurotransmitter formation, it's a GABA powerhouse. So it like 8 hours later, it really produces a significant amount of GABA in the gut. So using it with your dinner could help you sleep better because, again, GABA, I think the prevailing theory now with GABA is that it activates the vagal nerve because it can't really cross the blood-brain barrier, but we know that GABA works. I've used a lot of GABA, pharma GABA, different types of valerian roots, et cetera. So yeah, it's a really powerful supplement. It's our second oldest product and 3rd bestseller. People love it.
Awesome, Matt. Well, thanks again, brother.
Great to be here, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you found it helpful, please share it along to anyone else you believe it can serve. You can submit your own question to be answered on the show by going to ryankennedyhealth.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review for the show. Your feedback helps to support me on my mission to positively impact as many people as possible with this information. Please note The information depicted in this episode is purely for informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle or routine.